This is a overview of routing, and this would be weeks 1 and 2. Alright, we talked about finding solutions, 15 to 30 Dirk rule. If you can't get it solved within 30 minutes, don't come crying to me. Nah, it's good to work hard at finding solutions, but also you have to know when to set it aside and come back to it later. And then always look about how you can apply what you're working on in class. Packet tracers, 3 things. Make sure the results, you have your name, date, all that stuff, and capture just the results. Don't capture the whole screen. I shouldn't have to remind you the IP. We should be able to log into both workstations. Spring, NET-225. We talked about here we're talking about routing. That will take us about 3 weeks, and then we go into switching, and that will take us clear into the second half of the term. That will take us through spring break. Switching, we're going to talk a lot about Ethernet and Wi-Fi. Routing, we start talking about if you have, let's say this is Mason City, and you pay some service provider to give you a WAN connection to RUD, and you pay a service provider to give you a WAN connection to Charles City, and then you decide to connect those two with a service provider. Let me clarify that. So we have some service provider here, we have a service provider here, we have a service provider here. We learn about those specifics in a different course. But what we do want to learn now is how to route information between these. So that'll take a couple steps we'll talk about. First, static routes, and then dynamic routes. Static routes and then dynamic routes. Okay. Networks. When we talk about networks, we talk about addressing, and sometimes we refer to the word subnets. We're talking about the idea that a router, these all have to be different networks. The ports on a router are all on different networks. Maybe this goes to the internet, and this goes to some other location. We have a service provider in between. So this would be a network. So here, actually, a lot of times, if you were to count these, we have a WAN, we have a LAN. Let me clear that up. We have a LAN here, a LAN here, a WAN here, and then usually this is like a WAN going out to some, here maybe the internet. This network would be taken care of by your ISP. So here you would have 3 networks total, 1, 2, 3, to take care of your addressing with your subnets. Next, routers. So, an internet service provider, you could connect 2 locations like Mason City to Davenport using a VPN. So we can go through the internet, but not all companies. Big companies like Walmart, you know, they go through service providers to connect their stores. Now they may use the internet also, but they also have service providers to connect their stores. Now, when we draw a LAN like this right here, let me make that a little more clear. We draw a LAN like this one right here. That can represent lots of networks. We're going to learn how that works with VLANs. Start talking about those right after spring break. Here, this was a project we did in class. We were trying to analyze the network. So students were on routers, and then they were looking to see which routers they were connected to. And we were able to draw the diagram. Did some address adjusting for the Wednesday. Networking. Reviewed the address. Okay. Reviewed the OSI model. Oops. Take that E out of there. ER instead of routing, or take off the ing, one or the other. We reviewed the layers, okay, so we talked about physical layer, type of media, connecting into the network, Ethernet or Wi-Fi network, routing best path, internet protocol, how are we going to transport the data, TCP, IP. We also talked about ICMP, TCP, UDP, and so forth. Take that off of there. Talked about a route, IP route, network, mask, what interface we're going to, next stop. That would be a fully qualified route, okay? And we overemphasize default, typically going out, in this case going out to the internet, to this network, and then a static route back in. Default out, you would need a static back in. And we took the lab and adjusted and developed new addressing here on the inside, and then we worked to get out to the internet. And we worked on that a couple days. So here's a better look at the entire picture. You'll hear us over and over talk about this. We can create static routes, and then we can point those a certain direction. And we can apply out here an administrative distance. We'll talk more about that right before we get into dynamic routing. So we can create, this was an example of us creating a default route going out. Can indicate the interface and indicate the next stop. We can create static routes pointing back into our network. So if we need to find this network here, we'll need a static route coming in. Same thing up here. We'll need a static route coming back in to take care of these networks, depending on how we did the IP addressing. In terms of if we would need lots of static routes or just one major static route pointing back in. Talk more about that here later on. This was a lab, not much to say here. We did some adjustment on addresses, and there should be another set in here for a another router that was added to the network, a third router. Here's a picture of the whole thing. So these addresses here reflect the networks out, the LANs on these particular networks. And this is just a repeat of the previous page. Alright, so let me do this. So we've worked on a lot on static routes, and our next step are dynamic routing. Use a routing protocol. We're going to learn RIP version 2 to allow the routers to adjust the routes between locations. And what we'll do in the real world, we use a combination of both of those. That's it.